be the Red Ball. Express how American logistics defeated German military doctrine in World War II. Part 1. The German Miscalculation on August 19, 1944, at Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl reviewed intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the mathematics of Allied supply lines stretching over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to General George Patton's spearheading Third Army. The conclusion seemed inevitable to every German officer. The Americans had outrun their logistics. Patton would halt within days, perhaps within hours. No army in history could sustain such rapid advances without fuel. From his position at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters, Jodl analyzed what every German general understood from bitter experience. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing at combat speed. The Americans were now 400 miles from their primary supply depots on the Normandy coast. The calculation appeared inescapable. Patton's Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht precious time to regroup along the Seine River. Perhaps the German forces could hold until winter, when weather would favor defensive operations. What Jodl did not know was that 125 miles away, 5,958 trucks were already rolling eastward in an endless convoy. They traveled with headlights blazing in deliberate defiance of military doctrine. They carried 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it possible, was about to shatter every assumption about mechanized warfare. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks crashed through German positions along the Seine River. Within 1 week, American forces liberated Paris. Within 1 month, they stood at the German border. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a devastating lesson in American logistics. This lesson would redefine their understanding of modern warfare. It was delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African-American soldiers, who transformed a one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German General Staff's confidence in American logistical failure stemmed from decades of military experience and recent battlefield observations. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg tactics and revolutionized combined arms warfare. German officers understood intimately the tyranny of supply lines and the iron laws of logistics. Their own campaigns had repeatedly stalled when supply systems failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had foundered initially not from Soviet resistance, but from the simple inability to supply forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads that were little more than dirt tracks. Horse-drawn wagons, still comprising 80% of German military transport, could not match the speed of panzer spearheads. Railway gauge differences meant that supplies piled up hundreds of miles behind the front lines. Mountains of ammunition and fuel sat uselessly at rail transfer points, while forward units ran dry. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich von Luttwitz, who commanded the 47th Panzer Corps from September 1944 onward, had written in July of that year his professional assessment. He stated that the Americans faced the same logistical impossibility that Germany faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage, he observed. Machines require fuel, ammunition, and spare parts in quantities that cannot be delivered across such distances. The Americans have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next. Paralysis and culmination point failure. German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates with characteristic Prussian thoroughness. A single M4 Sherman tank burned fuel at a rate of 0.5 miles per gallon on paved roads. Cross-country performance was far worse. An American infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily to maintain combat effectiveness. An armored division needed 1,000 tons per day. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front through France. The mathematics seemed absolutely irrefutable to German logistics officers. 12,000 tons daily transported 400 miles from the beaches. The supplies had to travel over damaged roads through a transportation network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. Every bridge had been demolished. Every rail junction had been bombed. Every fuel depot had been burned. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who became Chief of Staff to General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt in September, calculated his professional opinion on August 20th. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they do not, and perfect roads, which they do not, and no mechanical failures, which is physically impossible, they still could not sustain Patton's advance for more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industrial power. Part 2. The Birth of the Red Ball Express. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on August 25th, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Gravel and Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Ayres of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers in a requisitioned French chateau near Laval. The mathematics they presented were stark and unforgiving. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in military history. American forces were advancing at speeds that defied all existing logistical planning models. Traditional supply methods had collapsed under the unprecedented strain. Railway transport remained inoperable due to German demolitions. Scheduled convoy systems could not maintain the required tempo. Depot-to-depot distribution created fatal bottlenecks. Colonel Ayres announced the solution to the assembled officers. "Gentlemen, we are going to create a dedicated one-way highway system from Cherbourg and the invasion beaches directly to the front lines. Every vehicle will operate 20 hours out of every 24-hour period. There will be no stopping except for refueling and mechanical emergencies. We will move 12,500 tons daily as a minimum requirement. This is not a request. This is an operational necessity." The name came from American railway terminology that every logistics officer understood. A Red Ball freight shipment was an express delivery that took absolute priority over everything else on the line. The Red Ball Express would operate on precisely the same principle. Absolute priority for military supplies. No delays under any circumstances, no exceptions for any reason. The technical specifications defied every principle of German military doctrine and seemed impossible by European standards. The system required 2 parallel one-way highways. One route would carry loaded trucks moving forward toward the front. The second route would carry empty trucks returning to the supply depots. Operations would continue 24 hours per day with headlights fully illuminated, completely abandoning standard blackout discipline. There would be a strict no-stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failure. Convoys would depart at 5-minute intervals while maintaining an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Mobile maintenance units would be positioned every 50 miles along the route. Military police checkpoints would remove any vehicle traveling below 25 miles per hour to prevent convoy disruption. Colonel Charles Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of the communications zone, reviewed the projected numbers with growing concern. "We need 140 truck companies operating simultaneously," he stated. "That requires 5,958 vehicles minimum, all operating at 90% availability rates. By every logistics textbook ever written, this is mathematically impossible. Yet within 36 hours of that meeting, the impossible became operational reality. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 316th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks. These vehicles were universally nicknamed Deuce and a Half by American soldiers. Each truck was loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles to the east. The convoy began rolling. The Red Ball Express was born. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have astonished and confused German racial theorists who believed Nazi ideology about human capabilities. Of the 23,000 drivers who eventually operated the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated United States Army. These men could not eat in white restaurants in much of America. They could not use white facilities in their home states. They were denied basic civil rights. Yet they were now keeping the most celebrated white general's army in constant motion across Europe. The drivers developed their own distinct culture within hours of operations beginning. They painted slogans on their trucks that reflected their determination and humor. Patton's blood bank appeared on one truck. Hitler, Here We Come, was painted on another. Detroit to Berlin Express became a common sight. They created their own informal traffic rules that prioritized mission over regulation. Slower vehicles pulled off the road immediately when faster trucks approached. Trucks with mechanical failures were pushed into roadside ditches rather than blocking the convoy. Any truck traveling below 20 miles per hour was considered a dangerous roadblock and removed from the route. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented in their military experience. Forward observation posts from Aufklärungsabteilung 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. They reported a continuous vehicle column with headlights visible for 20 kilometers. They observed no spacing between vehicles and no blackout discipline whatsoever. Estimates indicated 1,000 vehicles per hour were passing their observation point. The report concluded that Americans have abandoned all military precautions. This violated everything German military doctrine had taught for generations. Headlights at night invited air attacks from any available enemy aircraft. Continuous columns with no spacing presented perfect artillery targets. A single disabled truck could theoretically halt an entire convoy for hours. Yet the Americans seemed entirely unconcerned about these traditional military vulnerabilities. Part 3. Operations that defied military science. General der Panzertruppen Edgar Feutinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His detailed report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm among professional German officers. The enemy operates a supply system that goes beyond our comprehension of logistics, he wrote. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without any pause. They do not hide from observation. They do not disperse when under potential threat. They do not follow any doctrinal rules we understand. This is not military science as we know it. This is mass production methodology applied directly to warfare. What the Germans could not understand was that American logistics operated on fundamentally different philosophical principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment and conservation, Americans relied on overwhelming volume. Where Germans carefully conserved vehicles as precious assets, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure rates and planned accordingly with redundant capacity. Where Germans followed strict military procedures developed over centuries, Americans improvised continuously based on immediate needs. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express during its first week defied every German calculation of what was logistically possible. From August 25th to August 31st, 1944, the operation delivered 89,939 tons of supplies. The daily average reached 12,848 tons. The round-trip distance averaged 686 miles per load. Vehicle rotations involved 5,958 trucks, making 1.5 trips daily on average. The fuel consumed by the Red Ball Express operation itself, just to run the trucks, exceeded 300,000 gallons daily. German logistics specialists captured these figures from American documents abandoned at forward positions. They initially dismissed the numbers as obvious propaganda designed to deceive German intelligence. However, the numbers were completely accurate, and more importantly, they were accelerating rather than declining. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established an operational rhythm that seemed physically impossible to German logistics officers who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport needs. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus at Cherbourg. The average convoy consisted of 67 vehicles traveling together. Each vehicle carried a standard load of 5 tons, though 7-ton overloads occurred frequently when urgent supplies were needed. The time required to cover 350 miles one-way averaged 14 hours of continuous driving. Turnaround time at each terminal averaged 2 hours for unloading, refueling, and minor maintenance. At any given moment, approximately 5,000 vehicles were in constant motion along the Red Ball routes. The Red Ball Express generated tactical innovations on an hourly basis as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science considered fundamentally insurmountable. When trucks broke down, which occurred approximately 1,800 times daily, mobile maintenance units performed repairs directly on the roadside. Mechanics developed an efficient triage system. They had 15 minutes to fix a disabled vehicle or push it completely off the road. Spare parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable without hesitation. Entire engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes that accompanied the convoys. When the designated Red Ball route became congested due to accident or combat damage, drivers created alternate transportation paths without waiting for official orders. They commandeered French civilian buses to move personnel, freeing up military trucks exclusively for cargo transport. They borrowed abandoned German vehicles, quickly painted them olive drab, and pressed them into immediate service. They built improvised bypasses around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed material. The Germans observed this organized chaos and could not comprehend how it somehow produced effective results. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful advance planning, strict maintenance schedules, and proper bureaucratic procedures. The Americans violated every established principle of military logistics, yet their system accelerated its performance rather than collapsing under its own weight. Part 4. American Abundance versus German Scarcity. The most stunning revelation for German military observers was American fuel management on a scale they had never imagined possible. The Red Ball Express itself consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own transportation operations. This exceeded the total fuel allocation many entire German armies received for all purposes combined. Yet American fuel supplies never ran short. Never once did the Red Ball Express slow down due to fuel shortages. The Americans had created a parallel engineering marvel that German intelligence had failed to detect. Operation Pluto, which stood for Pipelines Under the Ocean, involved laying fuel pipelines directly across the English Channel on the seafloor. By September 1944, refined gasoline flowed continuously through underwater pipes that German intelligence had not even known existed. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route in meticulously planned positions. Tanker trucks ran their own parallel convoy system, ensuring no vehicle ever waited more than 10 minutes for refueling at any point along the route. General Major Walter Wehrmacht, observing operations from aerial reconnaissance photographs, wrote his analysis for Wehrmacht High Command. The Americans have established fuel dumps that are individually larger than our entire strategic reserves for the Western Front. They burn more gasoline simply moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions for combat operations. This is not warfare as we have understood it for centuries. This is industrial overflow applied to military operations. The Red Ball Express did not merely supply Patton's advance across France. It exponentially multiplied the speed at which American armored forces could operate. German military doctrine, developed through extensive combat experience, calculated that an armored division could sustain advances of 20 to 30 miles daily under optimal conditions. This estimate assumed adequate supplies, minimal resistance, and good weather. Patton's divisions, supplied continuously by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks at a time. This sustained operational tempo was unprecedented in military history. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles during morning operations against scattered German resistance. They halted for resupply at noon as planned. Red Ball Express trucks were already waiting with full loads of fuel and ammunition. The division advanced another 32 miles during afternoon operations. This 67-mile single-day advance completely shattered German defensive planning, which was based on assumptions of maximum 30-mile daily advances. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing these combat reports at Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them accurate. No armored force in military history can advance 60 miles daily for an entire week, he stated emphatically. Mechanical failures alone would prevent such sustained operations. This must be propaganda or unit misidentification. However, intercepted American radio traffic confirmed every report. Even more disturbing for German commanders, the Americans were broadcasting their exact positions openly without any encryption. They used no codes whatsoever. American units were supremely confident in their ability to move faster than German forces could possibly react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports analyzing the Red Ball Express in detail. The implications were absolutely catastrophic for Wehrmacht's strategic planning. Every fundamental assumption about American military capability required complete revision. The intelligence report contained observations that defied traditional German military science and doctrine. The Americans wasted vehicles with shocking prodigality, routinely abandoning damaged trucks rather than attempting field repairs. American drivers operated on amphetamine stimulants for days at a time, completely violating every principle of personnel management. The entire system maintained no camouflage discipline whatsoever, making it theoretically vulnerable to air attacks that never materialized because the Luftwaffe had been driven from the skies. Mechanical failure rates exceeded 30% daily, yet the system continued functioning because Americans simply overwhelmed problems with massive redundancy. The fuel consumption rates would have bankrupted any European military establishment within weeks. General Feldmarschall Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, wrote his response to these intelligence reports with barely concealed desperation. If these reports are completely accurate, then we face not merely a superior army, but an entirely superior civilization. They make no effort to hide their operations because they genuinely do not fear us. They waste resources with abandon because they possess, effectively, infinite resources. We cannot defeat this phenomenon with conventional military tactics alone. The disparity is too fundamental. Part 5. The Human Cost and Racial Ironies. The Red Ball Express drivers paid a severe physical price that German observers could not see from their distant observation posts. Individual drivers routinely operated for 72 straight hours, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine use. Accidents killed approximately 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in heavy fog conditions. Vehicles overturned on roads, damaged by combat. Trucks burned when overheated engines ignited fuel or cargo. Yet morale among the drivers remained extraordinarily high throughout the operation. These men, mostly African Americans, systematically denied equal rights in their home country, understood clearly that they were making genuine history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories catastrophically wrong, with every mile driven and every ton delivered. They were demonstrating capabilities that their own country's military leadership had doubted. They were fighting for a democracy that did not yet fully include them. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony to the Red Ball Express's devastating psychological impact. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told American interrogators his frank assessment. "We knew we had definitively lost the war when we finally understood your supply system's true capabilities. You violate every established rule of military logistics. You waste fuel prodigiously. You abandon vehicles casually. You exhaust your drivers beyond human limits. Yet you succeed through sheer overwhelming volume. You have industrialized warfare completely beyond our comprehension or ability to counter." The psychological impact on German forces throughout France proved devastating to combat effectiveness. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American truck engines throughout every night. The sound never stopped. Endless motors meant endless supplies for the enemy. German infantrymen had 3 rifle rounds per soldier remaining. American infantrymen were receiving millions of rounds weekly. The sound of American trucks itself became a form of psychological warfare more effective than any propaganda broadcast. The vehicles themselves amazed German engineers who had opportunities to examine captured or abandoned examples. The GMC CKW 2.5-ton truck, the absolute backbone of the Red Ball Express, represented mass production perfection that German industry could not match. General Motors had manufactured over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end. This exceeded the total number of trucks the entire German military possessed, of all types combined from all manufacturers. These American trucks featured engineering innovations that Germans had not implemented even in their best vehicles. All-wheel drive came as standard equipment, not as a special feature. Automatic tire inflation systems maintained proper pressure continuously. Waterproofing allowed these trucks to ford streams 30 inches deep without preparation. Engines ran reliably on low-quality fuel without any modifications. Vehicle heaters actually worked effectively during winter conditions, unlike German equipment. Even more stunning to German observers was the fundamental American maintenance philosophy. Where German mechanics painstakingly rebuilt engines, Americans simply replaced entire engine blocks. Where Germans carefully rationed spare parts, Americans discarded entire vehicles when repairs seemed time-consuming. Where Germans employed a small number of highly trained master mechanics, Americans deployed thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs adequately. Part 6. German attempts to respond. As the front lines moved steadily eastward, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that stunned German planning officers who were accustomed to requiring weeks of preparation for major logistics changes. When the original route terminating at Chartres became insufficient for operational needs, Americans created Red Ball Express extensions literally overnight. The White Ball Express operated from Rouen to Paris, handling secondary priority supplies. The Green Diamond route connected Cherbourg to railroad transfer points inland. The Red Lion Express supplied the 21st Army Group moving into Belgium. The ABC Express, named for Antwerp-Brussels-Charleroi, handled the critical northern supply corridor. Each new express route became fully operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks simply to plan similar operations before even beginning implementation. The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created severe cognitive dissonance for German soldiers indoctrinated with Nazi racial ideology. Nazi propaganda had declared black people inferior, incapable of technical tasks, and completely lacking in initiative or intelligence. Yet these supposedly inferior soldiers were performing logistics miracles that German forces, who considered themselves a master race, could not remotely match. The African American soldiers understood this profound irony completely. They knew exactly what the Nazis thought of them based on racial ideology. This knowledge made them drive even harder and perform even better. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong at the most fundamental level. They were fighting racism itself with truck keys and determination. They were defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners of war, forced to perform manual labor loading Red Ball trucks, found their entire worldview shattered by working alongside African American sergeants. These sergeants calculated load weight distributions faster than German engineers with university educations. They spoke better English than German language instructors. They treated prisoners fairly and professionally despite everything Nazi propaganda had told Germans about racial behavior patterns. The experience was profoundly disorienting for men raised under Nazi ideology. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure construction that Germans deemed absolutely impossible to create under active combat conditions. American engineers built or substantially reinforced 40 major bridges while the operation was already running at full capacity. They created 15 major fuel depot complexes from nothing. They established 26 vehicle maintenance stations with complete facilities. They constructed 8 temporary cities to house drivers during rest periods. All of this occurred simultaneously with continuous operations. The bridge crossing at Monte had been systematically destroyed by German engineers, specifically to halt American logistics. Wehrmacht calculations indicated replacement would require a minimum of 6 weeks, with optimal resources. American combat engineers built a fully functional temporary bridge in 14 hours of continuous work. Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads during construction. German engineers observed American construction methods with a mixture of amazement and professional horror. There were no lengthy planning meetings. There were no detailed blueprints. There was only immediate action based on field assessment. Americans built replacement infrastructure faster than Germans could destroy it. They created facilities that appeared overnight in empty French fields. One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers who understood the mathematics of ammunition supply. American artillery units fired without any restriction whatsoever. a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, the 12th Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every single round, plus a 20% surplus reserve. German artillery defending Metz was strictly rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity proved overwhelming in combat effectiveness. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German guns fell silent. German artillery officers calculated that such massive bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour, arriving at forward positions. The Red Ball Express provided exactly that without any pause or shortage. Part 7. The crisis that made the system stronger. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest operational challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far eastward that even the Red Ball struggled temporarily to maintain required supply rates. The round-trip distance now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing from exhaustion. Vehicles were disintegrating from constant use. German intelligence detected clear signs of strain in the system. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th with renewed optimism. American supply lines show definite signs of impending collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. Vehicle speeds have measurably decreased. Delivery tonnages are declining. This represents our opportunity to counterattack successfully while they are overextended. However, American adaptability once again surprised the Germans completely. Within 72 hours, the entire Red Ball Express reorganized itself to address the distance problem. The system created intermediate transfer points that cut individual truck runs to 350 miles maximum. They implemented systematic driver rotation systems to address fatigue. They established forward maintenance bases to reduce deadlined vehicles. They doubled the total number of assigned vehicles to maintain delivery rates. By September 12th, actual tonnage delivery had increased beyond previous levels. The crisis that should have halted Patton's advance only made the system more efficient and resilient. Supplementing the Red Ball Express, Americans implemented another logistics solution Germans deemed physically impossible. Large-scale aerial supply operations began delivering critical supplies directly to forward combat units. C-47 transport aircraft carried 3 tons each on supply missions. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air alone. The Luftwaffe, at its maximum capability peak, had managed 300 tons daily to besieged forces at Stalingrad, and German logistics considered that a supreme maximum effort. The Americans casually used transport aircraft exactly like trucks, without any concerns. They assumed aircraft losses as acceptable and overwhelmed the problem with numbers. The Wehrmacht could not compete with this industrial arithmetic. Part 8. The unprecedented scale of success. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles that violated every aspect of German military hierarchy and doctrine. Junior American officers routinely made decisions that would be reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht system. Sergeants commanded operations larger than German colonels typically managed. This extreme decentralization baffled German observers completely. American logistics appeared to operate without any apparent central control whatsoever. Every lieutenant acted with the authority of a general. Every sergeant operated with the autonomy of a colonel. This should have produced chaos and system failure by all traditional military theory. Instead, Americans achieved efficiency levels the Wehrmacht could not match. despite rigid hierarchical control. By October 1944, advancing railroad operations began to reduce Red Ball Express requirements as planned. The operation that was supposed to last perhaps 10 days had continued successfully for 82 days straight. During that period, it delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, over 122 million ton miles. This was the largest logistics operation in military history to that date. German commanders, now fighting desperately on their own borders for national survival, reflected on what they had witnessed in France. General Feldmarschall Walter Model wrote in his final operational report a stark assessment. We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or aircraft, though both were formidable. We were fundamentally defeated by American trucks and the logistics system they enabled. The Red Ball Express proved conclusively that in modern industrialized warfare, logistics is not merely support for strategy. Logistics becomes strategy itself. The transition from truck to rail transport was itself a remarkable achievement. American railroad engineers had reconstructed 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines, while the Red Ball was simultaneously running at full capacity. They laid new track faster than Germans had systematically destroyed it. They often used captured German rail equipment and rolling stock, quickly converting it to American gauge standards. The final Red Ball Express statistics defied every German calculation of logistical possibility. 82 days of continuous operations, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 222 million ton miles of transportation work performed, 5,958 vehicles averaged daily, with peaks reaching 7,000 vehicles, 23,000 total drivers employed over the operational period, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily just for truck operations, 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered exclusively to Patton's Third Army, 15 million individual rations transported, 135,000 tons of medical supplies delivered. Reviewing these official figures while in captivity after the war, German officers admitted they had fundamentally miscalculated American logistics based on European historical precedent. They had studied their own best logistics performance, multiplied it by 3 as a generous estimate, and assumed that represented the American maximum possible capability. They were wrong by a factor of 10. The disparity was not incremental but categorical. Part 9. The transformation of warfare. Beyond simple tonnage and distance numbers, the Red Ball Express achieved something far more profound than statistics could measure. It permanently destroyed German faith in their own military superiority and doctrinal assumptions. Wehrmacht officers who had confidently dismissed Americans as soft and mechanically dependent watched those same Americans achieve logistics miracles through sheer determination and industrial abundance. German prisoners of war throughout France would stand silently at prison camp fences, counting passing Red Ball trucks hour after hour. Some German soldiers wept openly when they truly understood what the endless convoys meant. They were not weeping merely because Americans could supply their armies adequately. They wept because they finally understood that Americans could waste more resources than Germany could produce. They were watching their entire worldview collapse, one passing truck at a time. The Red Ball Express forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American military establishment itself. The operation's spectacular success depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who remained segregated, systematically denied equal treatment, and completely barred from combat roles by official policy. General Dwight Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed this glaring contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded Eisenhower's reaction in his diary. The general stood watching colored drivers who had been operating continuously for 20 hours straight without rest. He stated clearly that these men are winning the war as surely as any infantry unit in combat. We need to reconsider many fundamental assumptions about military policy. The Red Ball success created immediate pressure for eventual military integration. 3 years later, African-American soldiers had proved in France what they always knew. Given proper tools and genuine opportunity, they would match anyone's performance. German racial theorists struggled desperately to explain this fundamental contradiction to Nazi ideology. SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistics operations entirely. The factual evidence was too overwhelming to deny honestly, yet acknowledging it publicly would be too damaging to core Nazi beliefs. German military engineers studied Red Ball Express operations intensively after the war ended. The lessons revolutionized logistics thinking worldwide and became foundational to modern military doctrine. Overwhelming volume overcomes individual inefficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates single-point vulnerability. Decentralized execution enables rapid response speed. Complete standardization multiplies overall capability. Human endurance has limits, but those limits are far higher than traditional military assumptions. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950 his professional assessment for military historians. The Red Ball Express proved definitively that logistics determines strategy, not the reverse as we had always believed. Americans understood this fundamental principle intuitively. We Germans learned it far too late to matter. Part 10. Individual Stories of Extraordinary Service. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged that Germans found incomprehensible within their rigid military framework. These accounts were verified through military records and after-action reports. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours straight, delivering critical ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai under heavy time pressure. He fell asleep at the wheel 3 separate times. Each time, other drivers in the convoy revived him and urged him to continue. He completed his mission successfully, delivering ammunition that kept the division in combat. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies forward. Standard military procedure required immediately abandoning burning vehicles carrying volatile cargo. Instead, Washington drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to reach a field hospital. He jumped out only when flames reached the cab. The supplies he delivered saved wounded soldiers from both American and German armies. These individual stories, multiplied thousands of times across the operation, revealed fundamental American military culture to observing Germans. Americans prioritized individual initiative over regulations. They accepted calculated risk-taking as necessary. They valued mission accomplishment over strict regulatory compliance. This cultural difference proved as important as industrial capacity. Desperately seeking solutions, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Greif during the Battle of the Bulge included detailed plans for using captured American trucks to create German supply lines supporting the offensive. The effort failed immediately and completely. German drivers could not maintain American operational speeds under pressure. German mechanics could not repair American equipment fast enough to prevent deadlining. German fuel supplies could not sustain the massive consumption rates required. Most fundamentally, Germans could not replicate the American cultural attitude of treating resources as unlimited and replaceable. Oberstleutnant Otto Skorzeny, commanding Operation Greif, reported candidly on its failure. We successfully captured 50 American trucks in good operating condition. Within 1 week of operations, 30 trucks were deadlined awaiting repairs or parts. Americans would have immediately replaced these vehicles without attempting repairs. We tried desperately to repair them because we had no replacements. That single difference explains our ultimate defeat more clearly than any tactical analysis. The winter of 1944-45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate operational test. Freezing rain, heavy snow, and ice should have completely stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine explicitly stated that wheeled logistics became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express continued operating throughout the winter. Drivers wrapped heavy chains on tires for traction. They poured alcohol directly into radiators to prevent freezing. They kept rolling regardless of conditions. Operational speeds dropped from 35 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour. However, tonnage delivery continued without interruption. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving steadily through blizzards that had completely stopped German panzer divisions. Part 11. The Final Assessment. In May 1945, after Germany's surrender, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for official historical records. Their conclusions proved unanimous and devastating to traditional German military pride. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz summarized the consensus view: the Red Ball Express represents a form of warfare we never imagined possible. Americans created a temporary civilization of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, and millions of tons of supplies that existed purely to feed armies. This civilization then dissolved completely when no longer operationally needed. We Germans built permanent infrastructure over years of careful planning. Americans created superior temporary systems in mere days. The most professionally insightful analysis came from General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare doctrine. We Germans invented blitzkrieg tactics, but never successfully solved its fundamental limitation of logistics. Americans solved it completely through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not merely a supply line in traditional terms. It was a continuously flowing river of material that ultimately drowned our forces in Allied abundance. The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944 currency values. This included vehicles destroyed or worn out, fuel consumed, French roads damaged, and French civilian claims for property damage. German staff officers accustomed to managing extreme scarcity found the figure absolutely incomprehensible, yet Americans considered it remarkably cheap for the results achieved. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers. It facilitated the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It shortened the war by an estimated 6 months, according to post-war analysis. Each day of continued war cost America approximately $250 million in direct expenses. The Red Ball Express paid for itself completely in a single day of war, shortened. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, commanding all logistics for the European theater, stated the American perspective clearly. We wore out 5,000 trucks and exhausted 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war in history, those would be considered catastrophic losses. In American industrial warfare, this represents acceptable operational overhead. An unexpected long-term consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics industries. Thousands of drivers returned to America with direct experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highway systems, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies including Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics principles to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency in most situations. Speed beats perfection when time matters. If you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours daily, you can move the world. Part 12. The Verdict of History. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the entire European theater. Without it, Patton's advance stops at the Seine River. Paris falls weeks later than it did historically. German forces successfully establish winter defensive lines. The war in Europe extends well into 1946, with hundreds of thousands of additional casualties. The operation conclusively validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics capability over tactical sophistication. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver theory, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express demonstrated beyond argument that in modern industrialized warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory far more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, supreme German commander in the Western Theater, received comprehensive intelligence analysis of the Red Ball Express. After studying the detailed reports for several hours, he summoned his entire staff. "Gentlemen," he announced gravely, "we face something that lies beyond conventional military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance completely irrelevant as a defensive factor. Our entire strategy assumed a culminating point where advancing forces inevitably outrun their supplies. That point does not exist for American forces. They have fundamentally revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the previous war." His operations officer, Oberst Hans Speidel, suggested attempting to interdict the Red Ball routes with remaining Luftwaffe assets. Von Rundstedt's response revealed his complete understanding of the situation's hopelessness. "With what forces shall we interdict these routes? The Americans operate 6,000 trucks. If we could destroy 1,000 vehicles, which we absolutely cannot, they would replace them within 1 week. We would need to destroy 200 trucks daily merely to match their production rate. We do not have 200 aircraft remaining in total." Part 13. The Human Dimension. Behind all the impressive statistics were intensely human stories that revealed fundamental American character to German observers. Stories of drivers who had not slept for 3 days straight, but refused relief because they knew their specific trucks might not complete the run. Stories of mechanics working in freezing rain to keep convoys rolling because soldiers depended on supplies. Stories of teenagers who lied about their age to drive trucks and serve their country. These individual stories, multiplied throughout the operation, created a powerful mythology that demoralized German forces as effectively as any military defeat. The Americans were not soft as German propaganda had consistently claimed. They drove themselves harder than Germans drove horses. However, they did it voluntarily from conviction, not from fear of punishment. This made them far more dangerous than German doctrine had ever understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda, more powerful than any planned psychological operation. German soldiers could hear the distant convoys operating throughout every night. Endless streams of motors that never stopped represented something profoundly demoralizing. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units began reporting hearing ghost convoys that existed only in their imagination, demonstrating the psychological damage the real Red Ball Express had inflicted. American psychological warfare units quickly recognized this impact. They began broadcasting recorded truck engine sounds toward German lines during periods when actual convoys were not present. German units consistently reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating how deeply the Red Ball Express had penetrated German consciousness and undermined morale. In November 1944, with rail lines substantially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. However, its operational methods had revolutionized military logistics permanently throughout the American military. The fundamental concept of continuous high-volume supply, wasteful but overwhelmingly effective, became standard American military doctrine that remains today. The final innovation was the remarkable speed of dissolution. The massive operation involving 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, and hundreds of fixed installations disappeared completely in 72 hours. Troops were immediately reassigned to other duties. Vehicles were rapidly redistributed to other units. Routes returned to civilian use. Germans required months to create far smaller operations and typically years to dissolve them properly. Americans built exactly what they needed, used it intensively, discarded it without sentiment, and immediately built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many specifically cited the Red Ball Express as demonstrating the complete hopelessness of continued resistance. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel stated during his official interrogation a frank assessment. When we finally understood your true logistics capacity, we knew absolutely that the war was irretrievably lost. You could supply advancing armies faster than we could possibly destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon system against which we had no defense whatsoever. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most professionally competent commanders throughout the war, was asked by interrogators what most surprised him about American forces. His answer came without hesitation. Not your tanks, which were adequate, not your aircraft, which were excellent, but your trucks and the system behind them. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had successfully militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were not fighting merely your soldiers. We were fighting your factories, your engineers, your industrial culture itself. Part 14. The Legacy. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as permanent testament to American industrial warfare at its peak effectiveness. Total cargo delivered was 412,193 tons. Total distance covered reached 122 million ton-miles. Trucks employed averaged 5,958 daily, with operational peaks reaching 7,000 vehicles. Drivers involved totaled 23,000 individuals. Operating days numbered 82 continuous. Fuel consumed exceeded 57 million gallons. Tires worn out reached 180,000. Vehicles destroyed or permanently damaged exceeded 5,000. Total operational cost was $100 million. German divisions defeated through supply advantage numbered 47. Estimated days of war shortened was 180. These raw numbers tell a story that transcends purely military operations. They represent the precise historical moment when warfare changed forever. Industrial capacity became more strategically important than tactical brilliance. Logistics determined strategy rather than merely serving it. The side with more trucks and better supply systems defeated the side with superior tanks and better trained soldiers. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp specifically honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington. The ceremony officially recognized the operation that had been consistently overshadowed by combat operations, but proved equally decisive in achieving Allied victory. Veterans who attended the ceremony spoke movingly of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle imaginable. They had driven through exhaustion that should have been physically impossible. They had driven through mechanical failures that should have stopped them. They had driven through weather conditions that stopped armored vehicles. They were predominantly black soldiers, segregated and discriminated against, denied recognition during the war itself. Yet they had delivered victory across Europe at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved conclusively that in modern industrialized warfare, logistics is not support. Logistics is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency could never match. German generals who initially laughed at American logistics were ultimately silenced by 6,000 trucks, delivering 12,500 tons daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had naturally assumed Americans would follow European historical precedent, carefully conserve scarce resources, and advance cautiously. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in overwhelming Allied abundance. The operation's success came not primarily from military genius in the traditional sense, but from distinctly American characteristics that Germans never truly understood. Industrial excess as national policy, widespread mechanical aptitude as cultural norm, improvisational skill across all ranks. Most importantly, the initiative of individual soldiers making independent decisions that in the Wehrmacht would require field marshal approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the primary beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote what stands as the ultimate professional tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit in the European theater. They drove through exhaustion beyond human endurance. They drove through mechanical failures that should have stopped them. They drove through weather that stopped our armor. Without them, the Third Army does not move forward. Without movement, we do not win the war. They were black soldiers, mostly segregated and discriminated against, systematically denied recognition, but they won the war as surely as any rifleman in combat. History must record this fundamental truth. That truth stands as the final testament to the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway to victory achieved what German military science had declared mathematically impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should theoretically allow. They maintained operational tempo beyond normal human endurance. They proved that in modern industrial warfare, the side with the most trucks decisively beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had laughed at American logistics in August 1944, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, and impossible to sustain over distance. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express. They finally understood that American trucks had defeated German tanks. Industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence. Logistics had become strategy itself. The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16, 1944. However, its impact echoed through military history for decades and continues today. It proved definitively that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or most brilliant generals. Victory belongs to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, over the greatest distances. The German generals who laughed dismissively at American logistics in August 1944 signed unconditional surrender documents in May 1945. They were defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves its permanent place among the great military operations of history. Not because it was elegant, because it was not. Not because it was efficient by traditional measures, because it violated every efficiency principle, but because it worked decisively when nothing else could have. The Red Ball Express kept Patton rolling eastward. It kept the Germans retreating westward. It proved beyond any doubt that in modern war, the convoy of supply trucks matters more than the column of battle tanks. The highways of France still bear faint scars from the Red Ball Express. Ruts worn by overloaded trucks remain visible. Bridges hastily repaired still stand. Roadsides occasionally yield abandoned vehicle parts. However, the greatest monument to the operation is not physical. It is the speed of Allied victory in Europe. Every day the war shortened, saved thousands of lives across multiple continents. The Red Ball Express shortened the war by months. In the final analysis, the German generals who laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern industrialized warfare. Amateurs study tactics and battles. Professionals study logistics and supply. Americans study trucks and production. The Red Ball Express was America speaking very loudly indeed, in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The last word belongs to an unnamed German officer whose identity is lost to history. He was quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration ceremony. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the captured officer said in heavily accented English to his guards a statement that summarized everything. "We prepared meticulously for everything imaginable, your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How does any army defeat an enemy who possesses more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting all the rules of warfare. They were creating a new reality, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had transformed logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals finally stopped laughing when they understood this fundamental truth. However, by then, Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistics operation in military history.